I'm talking with Father Malachi Martin, and Windswept House was published in 1995, July of 1995. It is now coming out in paperback, and we're talking with Father Malachi Martin, who is the author, best-selling author of that book, and other books of interest, The Keys of This Blood, The Final Conclave, and The Jesuits. Welcome to the program, Father. Good evening.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Michael.
Let me ask you this before we get into the heart of the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Since Windswept House was published in 1995...
No, it was 1996, Michael.
I'm sorry, 1996.
June 1996.
Okay, since it was published in June of 1996.
Yes.
What has changed?
In what? In the church?
In the church.
The word change is not exactly the word. It would be more accurate if you said to me what has developed or what has decaded, what has gone obsolete, what has, in that sense of change, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Change can be a positive thing, and most of the changes in the Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church since June 1996 have been negative.
They've been negative.
Definitely negative. As an organization, we're going down. We're not going up.
Okay.
And that in most significant ways and insignificant ways. So if you ask me to change in that sense, the general overall remark would be that change is for the worse as regards the organization of the Catholic Church, the institutional organization composed of bishops and priests and dioceses and parishes and religious orders and institutes and schools. The overall picture is a blighted one.
Now, let's talk about how, because some of my listeners in the audience are obviously non-Catholic. I want to connect these things because I think they all do connect, and in previous conversations that we've had,
yes,
they do connect. First of all, how did the Church ever get into this state? Why is the Catholic Church the brunt or the focus of, say, I guess a good word would be conspiracy by a certain group of people to get rid of it?
Well, you see, the word conspiracy can be used, provided one understands what a conspiracy is, because, for instance, I don't think you have read the board meeting, the notes for the June and July board meeting of the New York Times, have you?
No.
Yet they meet and they plan and plot the progress of the paper. They conspire together, but they're not going to publish what they talked about.
Right.
So if we speak about conspiracy in that sense, yes. But there's a wider sense of the word conspiracy. It is the prejudice against Roman Catholicism in the United States. It's the last respected bigotry, which is quite allowable in the United States. You can no longer be publicly bigoted about Jews, about blacks, about homosexuals, even about Mormons or Muslims, but you can and are quite tolerated be very bigoted about the Roman Catholic Church. It is the last respected bigotry of Americans.
If I may read a quote from Winston Churchill, the thing about conspiracy is interesting. Now, we're going to touch on this, too, because I'm sure this has a large part to play in this.
Yes.
But he said from the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, who is also known as Moses Mordecai Levi.
That's right.
And down to Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this world conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development of envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. Now, that's Winston Churchill.
Yep.
Now, he refers to a gentleman by the name of Weishaupt.
Yes.
How much of what is going on in the world today regarding the Catholic Church and the New World Order, how much of this has to do with Adam Weishaupt?
A very great deal, because Adam Weishaupt was a great Freemason, member of the Lodge, and the Lodge are in the forefront of the general effort to neutralize and offset the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. It's Michael, when you get down to the point of speaking about conspiracies and plans and plots, of course, you will be laughed out of court because they'll just simply say, well, he is a conspiratorial type. He relies on conspiracies.
Right.
And therefore, it's not a very useful way of describing what's happening in the Catholic Church. especially since you're trying to put the blame in the wrong place. The changes that have taken place in the organization, the institutional organization of the Roman Catholic Church, the changes have been the deliberate work of three popes. John the 23rd, who was Pope from 1958 to 1963, Pope Paul VI, who was Pope from 63 to 78, and John Paul II, who was Pope from 1978 until this day we're talking.
Okay, now...
They introduced the changes. They deliberately did so. And all the devastating changes that have been introduced was directly the work. All of them were directly the work of those three popes. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that no matter what enemies the Roman Catholic Church has, and it has enemies, and who hasn't got enemies, and we have rather a wide swath of enemies all over the world. We have. There's no doubt about that. And a lot of them are Freemasons, yes, and a lot of them are Jews, a lot of them are not Jews, a lot of them are just free thinkers, a lot of them are other religions like Mormonism, which heartily abhors the Roman Catholic Church, as do many sections of the Baptistic tradition. And there's a lot of those in America. There are about 90 million Baptists in the United States of different Baptistic traditions.
Right.
But they don't account for the deterioration of the church.
Well, I guess the thing I want to do when we come back for break is I want to get into what does account for the deterioration of the church, because I think that the audience will be surprised to hear that not only is it working for the deterioration of the Catholic Church, but it has much, much more far-reaching implications. Am I correct?
It's a wide application.
Yes. Okay, my guest is Father Malachi Martin, and when we come back, as we just mentioned, we will talk about that and get more into this. So stay tuned. I'm Michael Corbin. You're listening to the ParaNet Continuum. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest is Father Malachi Martin. He is the author of Windswept House, which is now coming out in paperback. It was a best-selling book, and it was published in June of 1996 in hardback. A very, very interesting novel. And, of course, as I mentioned, it's coming out in paperback now. And we're talking about not only the Catholic Church. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. This is not a program about the Catholic Church per se. However, what is going on with the Catholic Church is that the Catholic Church appears to be, and not only appears, but is, a major player in the upcoming New World Order, which we hear so much about today. And as we're going to hear from my guest, Father Malachi Martin, in just a moment, there is also another element in this mix that is working in other areas, and we're going to touch upon all of those. And very interesting program. Welcome back, Father.
Okay, thank you.
Now, before we went to break, we were talking about, the deterioration of the Catholic Church, and we were talking about...
As an organization.
As an organization.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why this is occurring.
Yeah. Before we do that, we should make it clear to, at least I should make my mind clear to our listeners, namely that we make a radical distinction between the institutional organization composed of bishops and priests and dioceses and parishes and institutes and schools and universities and libraries, und so weiter und so was, as our German cousins say. Between that, the institutional organization, and what we call the mystical body of Christ. And what is that? It is the assemblage of all those in a state of grace, what Roman Catholics call the state of grace. And they are either in heaven, or they're in purgatory, or they're on earth, and they're observant Catholics.
Okay.
There's a distinction between those two elements that make up the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay.
Now, what is deteriorating is the organization. And the question we've just touched on, the fundamental question is, what has caused it? And my remark was that it's our own doing. It was done by us to us. It was done by three popes, followed by their bishops, to the institutional organization. Why? Because of a meeting held in the 1960s, from 1962 to 1965, where a very clever, parliamentarily sage group of cardinals and bishops, under the prodding of two popes, decided to draw up a blueprint for the Church in the future, which would effectively liquidate the central mystery of Catholicism, which is the Mass, and which would reduce the status of the Pope, and that's the key element, reduce the status of the Pope to the status of the first among equals. And both of those things require explanation, but it was a blueprint drawn up, and it's taken just about 30 years to implement. And Pope John Paul II, the present Pope, he has achieved finally the complete deterioration of the organization itself. Now, you can ask, what is the motive? Why? The motive, I think, is misguided, of course, and was wrong in its calculation.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a great urge in the 60s at that meeting of the bishops. There were 2,800 of them, by the way, gathered in St. Peter's for 3 years.
Now, this is Vatican II you're talking
Vatican
about.
II, from 1962 to 1965. The spirit amongst them, and fomented by the popes in question and by the cardinals, and the cardinals are very important officials around the Pope, the spirit amongst them was, at all costs, at all means, let's get with the world. We've been isolated. We're antediluvian. We are not talking to modern man as modern man understands talk. We're not with him in building his habitat. We've been too busy with our own spiritual matters and theological developments and converting people. Let's take a completely different attitude and let's join the world. And let's modernize everything. And the big word that John the 23rd used was aggiornamento, which means bringing things up to date. Now, that was their spirit. And in order to do that, they jettisoned, in the Vatican Council, they jettisoned sacred traditions that had always been traditions in the Catholic Church back to the time of the first popes in the first century. Peter, Linus, Cletus, Clement, and all the others.
Mm-hmm.
They jettisoned those and substituted more modern-sounding doctrines, especially on 2 or 3 capital points. One was about human liberty. The other was about marriage, the meaning of marriage, and the purpose of marriage. A third was concerning the Holy Father, concerning the Pope's authority. On those 3 points, they changed completely the organization of the Church. Now, why did they do it? I think it was a mistaken zeal to belong to the modern world, to catch up with it. And we have caught up with it in the sense that, Michael, today, if you study any country at all, even some mess of a country like North Korea or Albania, you'll find that, but in all normal countries, you'll find always there are 3 components, and only 3. The first important component is the government. Government is terribly important nowadays, much more important than it was for our grandfathers and grandmothers.
Mm-hmm.
And the second component is the business community. And it's in many countries it's more important than the government, as in Switzerland or in Russia, modern Russia, and in the United States. Business is the fulcrum that moves the whole country.
It's the big thing.
And the third component is what we call that rabble of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Everything from the International Firemen's Association to Mothers Against Drunk Driving to the Catholic Church and to all the churches. We are just NGOs. It's a name taken from the United Nations. And we're in the marketplace. We're no longer consulted, especially by anybody. No church is. All governments are independent of that. Even the so-called Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran and all those, the religion has very little to do with the way the government is run.
Now, there is an underlying...
Well, I finished this.
Okay, go ahead.
The change is that the church is now competing in the marketplace and competing with the weapons of competition, not with its spiritual power. Not with its spiritual power.
And therein lies the conflict.
As losing the battle, because the only weapons put in the hands of the church by Christ, who founded the church, are spiritual weapons.
That's it.
So that's where I think the difficulty started. Now, so much so, Michael, that, and this is going to shock some of even our non-Catholic listeners, we have now, the Catholic Church, in its latest statistical index, has just published that Catholics number 1 billion plus.
Wow.
Out of 5 billion, a population of 5.5 billion. And yet, you can safely say, if you're going to be frank, and of course, as the British say, bloody-minded, you're going to tell the truth and say that certainly 2/3 of those Catholics throughout the world, Latin America, Europe, Asia, Australia, Canada, USA, 2/3 are being led by the nose unknowingly out of the Catholic faith, because they're not taught the Catholic faith as it was always taught.
Is this part of a, and we'll answer this after the break, but is this part of a larger grand design by someone?
Well, the only person who really designs history is Christ.
Okay.
He is the king of history.
All right.
And therefore, it's what he has in mind that I think we should concentrate. Of course, there are little plots and plans, and there are little foolish little lodges of Freemasons making their plots and plans, and there are still communists, and there are still anti-Catholics, and there are still sort of official atheists. There's everything as gross as NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, up to, something like Maurice Strong runs, sort of natural religion and recourse to a completely earthly life. But that's not, that's all detail. There is a master designer of human history, and he's called Christ.
Okay, hold that thought. We'll come back to that. My guest is Father Malachi Martin, author of Windswept House, a novel. Again, it's out in paperback in all major bookstores, and you are encouraged to get a copy of it. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Michael Corbin. This is the ParaNet Continuum. We're back with my guest, Father Malachi Martin, author of Windswept House, and we're talking about the main theme of the book is the undoing or the destruction, if you will, of the institution of the Roman Catholic Church. We're talking about reasons that this is occurring, and I wanted to find out, because one of the elements that we find in your writings, Father, is that there is it's heavily laden with references to Fatima.
Yes, it is. And that enters into the wider picture. We'll have to explain Fatima very briefly for our listeners so that they refresh their memory about it if they don't know about it. But the key, Michael, for me is this. When I survey what the churchmen have done to the organization since 1960, what they have done to it to destroy it and make it deteriorate, my feeling is, my theological feeling is, that Christ, who is the head of the church and the savior of mankind and the king of all nations, concluded when they had made their plans that were going to lead to this desiccation and deterioration of his church, the institutional organization of his church, he said, okay, go ahead. Christ has a very, very permissive doctrine in this matter. For instance, I can drink liquor, so can you.
Right.
He won't send an angel to stop me becoming a drunk, becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah, that's your free will.
That's right. He won't send an angel. And similarly, if I want to spread my wings as a sexualist, I can get all the diseases in the world, including AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
He won't send an angel. You give him the means to survive and flourish. You neglect them, goodbye, pal. Sometimes he will exercise excessive mercy if somebody's praying for me and preventing me going too far. But that's a pure grace, and there's no guarantee it will ever come to me.
Right.
Similarly with the nations and with his churchmen, they want to make short-term judgments because they feel they want to be amongst the honored people of the nations. They want to be in the United Nations. They want to be acclaimed as modern men. And they want to be completely à la page, as we say in the French, with all the new developments. Then Christ will say, all right, you know it's wrong. You know it's not my work. Your work is to save souls, period. And the only victory you should really claim is when somebody dies in communion with the church and doesn't go to hell, goes to purgatory or heaven. That's the only victory you should really claim. But you want another victory on earth. You want to build man's habitat, and you want to share in the glory of creating a new civilization, which is what two popes have said explicitly in the last 30 years. That has nothing to do with my message on the cross and with the salvation I've won for you all. But go right ahead, because I'm now getting tired of this organization. And just as I will leave a human body racked with liquor and with a venereal disease, I will let it perish, if that's the free will choice of the man. So I will let this perish and build something new in its place. So I think it's the permissive will of Christ, letting men's perversity, church men's perversity, and infidelities work out to the destruction of an organization which, in the final count, he doesn't need. He doesn't need. I think it's as simple as that. And you see, Michael, there's a scene in the gospel. You know, when Christ was crucified and died and put in the tomb, the day following, two of his disciples, decided to get out of Jerusalem because the Jewish authorities were looking for supporters of this Jesus whom they had just put to death as a troublemaker. Mm-hmm. And they started walking out to reach a town called Emmaus, which is about 6 miles from Jerusalem. And they were fed up because they had counted on this man, Jesus of Nazareth. They had counted on him to expel the Romans and reestablish the glory of the kingdom of David and reunite the 12 tribes and make Israel a name amongst the nations. And he was now a corpse. And they were talking about this with the usual face, and they met this stranger walking along who looked quite jaunty and happy. And he said, "Shalom lachem." Hello. What's up with you? Why are you so sad? And they said, "What's up with you? Do you not know what happened?" And they told the whole story of Jesus, whom they counted on to expel the Romans and create the kingdom. And they said, "He's now dead. So we're getting out. We're out of here," as we say in America. And he said to them, "Well, that's fine. I'm going the way you're going. Why don't we chat about it? And by the way, have you read Moses, the Pentateuch? And have you read Jeremiah and Isaiah about the suffering servant? And have you read the other books of the Bible, which is our possession?" They said, "Yes, we have." Well, they said, "Did you not notice that every one of them, especially those you respect deeply, speak and say that the Messiah, if he does come to expel the Romans and recreate the kingdom of Israel, he must die. He must die crucified as a worm and no man, broken to pieces." And then by that time when they reached Emmaus, and he pretended, the Bible says, to go on, "Finxit ire longius," in the Latin version. He pretended to go on. They said, no, why don't you stay with us? Because as you talked, our hearts are burning. We've got some fire, some light in it. Why don't you come in and have some bread and wine for the night anyway? You can go on after that. He did. He went in, and they ordered bread and wine, and then at the break he broke the bread into 3 portions, and at that moment they recognized their beloved Jesus. And then they knew. So they paid their bill, I suppose, and rushed back to Jerusalem to talk to Peter and the others, and say, "We've seen him." And Peter, of course, said to her, "Listen, we've seen him already. We know." Peter wasn't going to be outdone by any member of the team. And this is the fact. This is the brute fact about Christianity. We were founded on a gibbet, a cross, a dying man bleeding all his blood, mocked and whipped like a cur, and then buried in somebody else's tomb. Remember when Jesus took Andrew and Peter, I think, and John, he took them up to Mount Tabor, and he was transfigured in front of them with this brightness of divinity. And when they were coming down, he said to them, "Now we're going to Jerusalem, by the way, and I'm going to be crucified by the chief priest, and on the 3rd day I will rise again." And Peter, of course, the big boss, said, "No, you won't. We've just been watching you and the prophets talking, and God the Father. Come on." And Jesus said to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Meaning, you're stupid. You don't know the things of God. It behoves, it is necessary, it is fitting that I, the Messiah, be put to death and die, and thus enter into my glory. And apparently this is the law he has for his church. We've had our human glory in the papacy, and in the Roman Catholic Church for almost 2 millenniums. That's a long, long time, 2 millennia.
Yeah.
And we have deteriorated successively since the 16th century, and now we're coming to the end of Catholic times as they were. And he is allowing this because he finally wants to have a church which is without spot or wrinkle, as Paul says, his bride. And this organization is not without spot or wrinkle, as you and I know. So that's his holy will. And that means that we're heading for a time when we will have at least dry martyrdom, if not very wet martyrdom. And it means a deterioration of the public image of the church. It means exclusion from the councils of the greats. It means that we're going to be a vast minority, treated as a dangerous minority, and we've got to put up with that until the skies light up with the presence of Mary and Jesus.
Would that be interpreted as the end?
No. Just a changeover completely.
Just a message.
Yeah, because the Antichrist hasn't been active yet. I mean, there's a whole chapter to be played out. But the coming chapter refers to this desolation of the vineyard, this destruction of the organization, which is auto-destructing, as Paul VI, in his misery towards the end of his life, and he helped mightily in it, he said, the church is auto-destructing itself. It's killing itself off.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to go to break. We'll come back with some closing comments for the first hour, and we're going to find out what projects you're involved in at this present time. You're working on another book, I understand. Stay tuned. My guest is Father Malachi Martin. We're talking about his book, Windswept House, which is now out in paperback, and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. Returning from New York is my guest, Father Malachi Martin, author of Windswept House and The Keys of This Blood, The Jesuits, The Final Conclave, and other books. A very, very prolific writer, expert on the Catholic Church, and of course, an exorcist. And we're going to talk about some of that also in this program tonight. Father, to wrap up the National Hour,
yes.
Let's get a closing comment. Basically, we're in 1998. Is the Antichrist alive in the world today? Do you think he's there somewhere?
Oh, he's alive, but he's not.
His time isn't yet.
His public function has not started.
Okay.
Because he will have a public function. And by the way, there's no, if you want to spend a couple of minutes on it, there's no question we will recognize him. The Bible is absolutely explicit about it.
What are the signs?
There will be 3 things we will know it's the Antichrist. First of all, the world will be faced with problems that are insoluble as in our present condition of technology and wisdom.
That wouldn't be far off.
No, it's not far off. It's around the corner, but we're not there yet.
Okay.
We're not battled yet. If you go to the United Nations, I frequent the United Nations every week of my life. There's a jaunty, we-can-do spirit, which will be broken, of course. But I'm not. I've no Schadenfreude about that. I've no joy at that. It's going to be misery for many people, compared to which the misery of Rwanda is a passing joke. Anyway, But the first thing is there will be insoluble problems, problems that will harrow the souls of men and women. Number 1. Number 2, there will be a man, visible, tangible, with a name and an identity, and he will have the solutions. He will have real solutions. That's the second sign.
Number 3.
Number 3 is that people will turn around and say to him, you must be divine. You must be.
And we will worship
Only
him.
Divinity, and of course worship him, and he will say, yes, I am. Kneel and kiss my feet.
And people will. I believe that people will.
They will.
Lots of them.
When you see that, then take your wife and kids and get the hell out of the way, because there's going to be a lot of trouble.
I know we laugh, but it's probably not going to be something to laugh at the time.
Because in that day there's going to be, we have experienced down in Florida, in Flagler County and a few more places, fire from heaven. That's a joke compared to what's going to happen.
I understand. We're about out of time for this first hour. Okay. What are you working on now? What projects are you working on now? You're working on another book?
3 projects.
What are they?
2 of them, writing, of course. And then I have a lot of consultation and a lot of talking.
When is your next book coming out?
That'll depend on the opportunity. At the present moment, the condition of the Catholic Church is so iffy. it's too long to explain in a few moments, that it's very hard to know when is the best time to publish a book. Because whatever book I published, I wanted to hit the button for that particular period. Windswept House did, because it predicted what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Down to details that really angered an awful lot of churchmen, because they felt that I had spied on them, and I hadn't.
Well, hey, their game needs to be exposed, and I think you've done a very good job at doing it, because there's a lot to this. Okay, well, Father, thank you very much, and of course you'll be joining us in the second hour, so those of you in the Denver area, stay tuned. If you want to reach me, you can do so by calling 303-863-0484. My email address is mcorbin@dimensional.com, and of course our website at www.paranetinfo.com. Again, thanks to Father Malachi Martin. We'll see you next week. Until then, I'm Michael Corbin, telling you to keep your eyes on the skies. Good night. Good evening and welcome to this edition of the ParaNet Continuum, home of common sense, no nonsense, paranormal talk radio. If you joined us in the last hour, we have Father Malachi Martin, who is the author of Windswept House. We're talking about his novel, published in June of 1996. It is now coming out in paperback, and it's a book that I highly encourage everyone to read. Father Martin has been a prolific writer, an expert of the Roman Catholic Church, an exorcist, and quite the guy, and somebody who I really enjoy interviewing, as you can tell. Anyway, welcome to the program, Father.
Welcome, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
To be talking with you. By the way, I want to correct one thing. Windswept House is cast as a novel, but of course the whole world knows that every name there is the name of a real person.
Absolutely. And
all the events, about 92% of the events spoken about in the so-called novel, are real events, which the cognoscenti, the wise ones, have all listed, and they pass around lists about the names with their decipherment. But I've called it a novel because, well, it's good for my kneecaps, first of all. And secondly, then it creates a certain, it gives you a certain latitude.
Sure. In
describing things which everybody knows happened.
You anticipated my question, because I was going to ask you why you wrote a novel instead of a...
Well, because you've got your answer to that, I think. It's
sure.
easier to do that because you create a latitude, you know? And you can always say, no, I didn't mean you at all. Who says, no, I wasn't talking about you, Monsignor, or Bishop. So it's a way of getting around. And by the way, the historical novel of that, this kind of thing is not a historical novel. It was Norman Mailer, a good old American writer, who coined what it is. He calls it faction. Not fiction.
Faction.
Fact, but it's faction. And he has written several books like that. By the way, Taylor Caldwell, all her books were faction.
I believe that.
They were.
Sometimes people...
about the big robber barons. And a lot of the books from Sir Geoffrey Archer, he's a British novelist, a very successful one, a member of Parliament, are all faction.
Sometimes as I've heard people say, sometimes truth can only be told as fiction, and predominantly because of the, you like your kneecaps.
Yes, they won't be pleased with you, you know. Bank balance may disappear, or the next novel you write, there won't be any paper in the paper mill to print it. So it's amazing what happens in this life when somebody's offended with you. Well,
let's look at parts of Windswept House, and let's talk about that.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting because the history is prologue, which is the first part of the book.
Yes.
Talks about some very interesting things, predominantly a meeting with one of the popes by several gentlemen representing the New Europe, if you will.
That's right.
And then, of course, there's a segment in there that's very disturbing. It's the enthronement ceremony.
It's very disturbing, and the whole darn thing is very disturbing. And what the novel says, really, what this book says, is that there has been an event, carefully organized, which was intended to enthrone Lucifer within the Vatican. And it's a complicated thing to do because the enthronement of Lucifer anywhere, according to its devotees, and by the way, there are many thousands of devotees in the international organization, it always requires a human sacrifice. And how could you have a human sacrifice in the Vatican? But we leave people to find out how that was achieved in this particular event, because there was a human sacrifice. And
when you say, if you don't mind me interjecting, when you say a human sacrifice,
yes.
Are you talking about they killed someone?
Oh, yes.
Good heavens. Okay.
But not in the Vatican.
No.
Not in the Vatican. It's a very lugubrious thing. You see, the whole question of demonic possession and the Luciferian tradition is a very disturbing thing, and most people, Catholics included, and most bishops, and we have 4,700 bishops now in the Catholic Church, most of them don't want to talk about it, don't want to reflect on it. It's a very disturbing fact. And the fact is that demonic possession has increased. Well, I started doing anything in exorcism about 1970 of this century, and since then, the incidence of possession and obsession, demonic possession and demonic obsession, has increased about 740 to 800%.
That's a lot.
Well, it's a very great loss, and then the phenomena has changed. We are now facing groups of 20-somethings or 30-somethings coming to us and saying, look, I made a pact with the devil, with Satan, with Lucifer, however they use it, because I wanted a job, I wanted this woman, I wanted that career, I wanted the money, and I got it all, and now he won't let me go. Please help me. I mean, we have that nowadays. We also have the new phenomenon of the demonic possession, obsession of children.
Demonic possession of children.
3, 4, 5, 6.
Good heavens.
Very frightening. It's very frightening. Very hard to deal with.
Let me ask you this. When we're talking about 700 to 800% increase in demonic possession, how does that translate out to men and women on the street? I mean, does that mean that one... I mean, I don't know how we translate that into numbers, but... I
don't know. I can't... It's very hard for me to do that because, you know, we tried to do about 20 years ago, we said, let's make the profile of the possessible person, okay?
Okay.
And we did our best. We drew up categories like sex, age, economic status, linguistic background, culture, physical appearance, education, money or riches, or whatever it was, and all the other classifications. We found there was no profile. It seems to be completely random. They're not necessarily poor, they're not necessarily rich, they're not necessarily... For instance, I know, in my whole 33 years in New York, I've come across lousy cops and good cops. I've come across prostitutes for confession, and I've come across businessmen. I've come across all kinds. They're just naughty people.
Right.
But they're not possessed. Possession is a very particular thing.
Well, is it something that depends upon the person?
Yes, it depends on the person. They say yes. They must say yes. Nobody's possessed against his will. You don't suddenly wake up in the morning and say, "Good God, I'm possessed."
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Let's take for an example. I know that I've heard this before, that wherever there is satanic ritual or any kind of occult ritual, there is a very strong danger or a very strong possibility that possession will take place. Is that true?
It can't take place without possession.
You mean the ritual and all of this cannot take place without
somebody being possessed?
So someone in the group that might be involved in something would be a possessed person.
Who organized it?
What's the telltale signs of a possessed person? Or are there any?
Multiple. It can be various things. The multiple signs, and there are telltale signs in younger people. In older people, the signs are very difficult to detect because they've learned to cover up.
Okay.
And an older person who has undergone possession probably is what we call perfectly possessed. That is, they're completely tranquil about it.
And they got a smile on their face.
Yeah, sort of a smile. The younger people, though, rebel against it at a certain moment. And hence you have the phenomenon of getting violent and thrashing around. And a baby, when it's hungry, it bangs its head against the ground if you don't feed it.
Mm-hmm.
And we eat also. And there are signs like somebody who's out of control, speaking funny languages, losing control of their bowels, a horrible smell sometimes pursuing them, or freezing cold, or strange happenings, irrational things happening to tables and chairs and pictures and doors and corridors where they walk, or the car they're driving. The signs are multiple, and you've got to be very careful to do a proper diagnosis, because sometimes it's just people are stupid, or they're afflicted, or they've got a disease like...
mental illness of some type?
Yeah, Huntington's chorea, or Latourette syndrome, all of which we know is due to chemical imbalance of some kind or other.
Right.
Or a tumor in the brain. So all that thing must be carefully studied in a particular case.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're looking today, I mean, here in Colorado, for example, we have a big movement called the Gothic movement, or the death culture, or whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
And you see these young people walking around the streets in black and wearing, just odd clothes and strange behaviors, and they're practicing some very bizarre sexual rituals.
Now, I would suspect, but I don't know anything about that group, I would suspect that it is ultimately Luciferian.
Do these people know what they're doing, or are they...
Michael, remember this, there is a great attraction about Luciferianism, and the attraction is power. If you lose the grace of God, if you haven't got it, if you don't pray, if you don't belong to Christ, if you don't belong to God, if you've lost his grace, then the next best thing you can find is Luciferian. Because it's a great sense of power, and it does give certain powers, there's no doubt about that. And Lucifer does help his adepts. He does protect them and aid them. They're not completely without resources. And the training, the formation is such that it makes you immune. You're taught to inflict pain without flinching. You're taught to see death. You start with puppy dogs and cats, and you can graduate to babies without a qualm. And destruction, mainly by fire, becomes a joy. These are the marks of the Luciferian attachment. And it starts in a funny way through some mistake, like the use of an Ouija board, or transcendental meditation, or through hypnosis, or through, as we found out with the 20-somethings and 30-somethings, positive requests.
What type of requests, I'm sorry?
Young men and women who can't make it, can't get that job.
So they actually ask for it?
Oh, they ask to make a pact. And then they come and say, listen, please help me out of this. He won't let me go. And by the way, it's very hard for them to go. And sometimes they call you up and say, forget it, I'm done. He's my boss. He's going to take me. I belong in hell. And they're gone.
Now, this kind of touches on something kind of interesting I want to talk about, because, the scope of this program deals with things paranormal and that type of thing. I'm wondering, I've been very concerned about this. We've had some guests on the program lately who have talked about mind control. And they're saying that, for example, we have the UFO phenomena, which we deal with a lot on this program.
Yes.
And, it seems like in the early years of sightings and that type of thing, they were just sightings. But now, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been hearing some very disturbing stories about people being visited by aliens, taken from their bed, abducted, if you will, and sexually raped. Now, some people have advocated that that is nothing more than certain, I guess the word that's been coined is psychiatrists, enacting mind control on people, and that there's a movement, if you will, to bring people under some kind of control. What are we dealing with here? In your opinion, as a theologian, what is, in your opinion, what are we dealing with here?
Listen, I've got to crawl out on a limb in this matter. It is very hard, in the face of the evidence we now have, and it's very sparse evidence, but we have evidence, it's very hard to deny the existence of life elsewhere, not in our galaxy, but elsewhere. It's very hard to deny that.
Sure.
On the other hand, we know nothing about it. Nothing.
Or do we?
No, we don't know anything about it. We just don't know anything about it.
Okay.
So there may be a small group of men, scientists, who have found out something, but we're not told it yet. We do know that everything that's alive, that lives, comes from God.
Right.
And Christ said, when he was just leaving his apostles, before his ascension into heaven, he said, all power is given to me on earth and in the heavens, in the skies. And we forget that. But I'm not saying that there are human beings.
Or necessarily even aliens.
Oh, they're alien to us.
In the literal sense, they're extraterrestrial.
Yeah, they're alien to it. There's no doubt about that. there's no doubt about that. The Earth has been under monitoring and probing efforts sporadically in the last 600 years. But we know so little about it that we can't say anything about it except to save our own souls on this earth. I'm crawling on a limb there because the evidence is just too strong. But we know nothing about it. They're not necessarily human. They're not necessarily evil. They're not necessarily malignant. But they're alien, completely alien to us, and they're far advanced than we are, technologically in certain ways.
Well, some people might say that they're demonic.
No, that's garbage. The demons, you see, the demons, we don't know their number. Anyway, by the way, if there are 5 of us in the room, we know there are 5 because we count 5 bodies.
Right.
Demons have no bodies. You can't count them. The differentiation between demons is by function. By function, what they do, what they were made to do, what originally God planned and created them to perform, their function. 1/3 of the angelic host, we're told, revolted and was condemned to hell. They have no bodies. They can assume certain forms, but not permanently. They don't be incarnated.
So what you're saying then is that the phenomena that we're talking about appears to have a body of some type, not human.
That's right.
But it is
it's a body.
It's a body.
Has certain functions like our functions, but not all our functions, and it has abilities that our bodies haven't got. But we know so little. I'm really crawling on a limb by saying this, but this is the evidence.
Well, we're just speculating here.
I'm not really speculating. This is concrete scientific evidence.
I see.
And I'm not if I were to speculate, I'd say, well, they don't think rationally, or they do, blah, 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 blah. You know, they're immortal, they're not. I'd be speculating, but that they do exist.
Would it be fair to say that their fingerprint is stamped throughout history, even before 600 years ago?
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. It's not fair to say it. It's not accurate to say. We don't know, Michael. We just don't know. We can speculate about this, that, and the other, but we don't know. And when it comes down to this stuff, you've either have recourse to strict technological and scientifically based stuff, or else you're launched into, the most amazing speculations that end up really doing the work of the devil, because they're confusing.
Right.
We do know that God sent his Son to become one of us, with a body and a mother. And he died and effected our eternal salvation, so that we will not end up just corpses hidden in the ground because we smell after death. That our soul becomes God's possession again, and eventually will be reunited with a form of our body which will not suffer for the limitations that our bodies have on this earth. That's all we know. We know an awful lot about that, the grace of God and the church and the sacraments and what we can do and how close we can get to God in this life before we die, before we ascend into the hands of our Creator. But we know very little else about it. Then we're discovering that there are beings, living beings in transgalactic situations which we can't reach. We've no fuel that can carry us there.
Wow.
And if it did carry us there, we couldn't survive. So we don't know what's going to happen with all that.
Okay. All right, we're going to go take a break, and when we come back, we'll delve a little bit deeper into this. Very, very fascinating discussion so far.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My guest is Father Malachi Martin. We're talking about his book, Windswept House, and stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. I'm Michael Corbin, and you're listening to the ParaNet Continuum. Returning from New York, and I want to thank you for being with us, Father, is Father Malachi Martin, who is the author of Windswept House. And we've been talking and having a very interesting discussion, as a matter of fact, which kind of started out about a chapter in his book about the enthronement of Lucifer at the Vatican. And as wild or outrageous as that may sound, as Father has mentioned, a lot of those events that he writes about in the book are indeed based upon fact. And I wanted to ask you, Father, in some ways, in my own way of looking at things in religion, this kind of makes a lot of sense when people are trying to understand the book of Revelation and that type of thing, it makes perfect sense that
It does.
the Vatican would be the place that Lucifer would want to take his throne.
Sure. If he can do that, he can do an awful lot.
Sure. Now, let's kind of roll back a little bit. We were talking the first hour about, I brought up the name Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati.
Yes.
This plot that Weishaupt put into motion, first of all, give us a little bit of idea who Adam Weishaupt was.
Well, he was a mid-European thinker who had no divine faith at all.
He was going to school to be a Jesuit. Is that what he was doing?
That's right.
But he never made it.
He lost all that. Faith was taken away from him, and doubtless he gave up faith voluntarily, because you don't lose your faith without doing it voluntarily.
Right.
And the law applied to Adam Weishaupt. If you're not for Christ in this world, you're for Lucifer. There's no choice.
There's no in-between.
There's no neutrality. And evidently his particular fate was to be approached and taken over by Lucifer, and to be the founder of groups of people who would be steadfastly enemies of Christianity and of Catholic Church in particular, because the Catholic Church is the norm. If, Michael, by perchance, the Catholic Church ceased to exist overnight in this world, the lacuna, the gap thus left, would swallow up everything we know as beautiful, as good, as tolerable in this life.
And in some ways, I think that could possibly happen, at least visibly.
Well, Christ said his church will last forever, to the end of the world. So it's not going to happen. But if it were to happen by a sort of hypothesis, there's no doubt about it, everything would collapse. There's a big black hole, swallow everything. But anyway, that's what Adam Weishaupt is. And his legacy is that of a very stringently hostile and active group of people who would like to undo every mooring of Christianity in the socio-political and cultural life of the nations. And, of course, that sort of intention is easily used when you're speaking about globalization, which we're now in the middle of.
Now, these fellows that are engineering this,
Yes.
and no doubt that from reading Windswept House, that there's definitely a small cabal of people globally who are engineering this.
Oh, sure.
Are they in contact? I mean, when you say Luciferian, obviously it means that they are devoted to Lucifer, who is a supernatural or preternatural being.
Sure.
Do they, in the book, I find it interesting, in the book you refer to a fellow as Capstone.
That's right.
What does that refer to? What does that character refer to?
It refers to the head of that group.
Now, would that be fair to assume that that is referring to Lucifer himself?
No.
No.
No. Capstone is his representative.
So it's a man.
Yeah, it's a person. Just as Christ has a vicar on earth.
I see.
Lucifer has.
Interesting. Now, this man, this Capstone, would it be fair to say that he is supernaturally or preternaturally given instructions through dreams or some type of enlightenment?
No, preternaturally.
Okay.
Not through dreams either.
Direct face-to-face communication, possibly?
Well, not face-to-face, because Lucifer hasn't got a face.
Okay.
No, it's communication.
I see. And this is basically, they're working a timetable.
Sure. We're in what is called the availing time now. What is the availing time in their language and our language? It is this, that at the present moment, possibly coming to an end, but at the present moment, we're in a time when it would be possible, if God allowed it, for Lucifer to take over the church and run it into the ground. It's the availing time.
Mm-hmm. What is that timetable tied to?
It's tied to the inscrutable designs of God.
I see.
And all we can do is do our best and hope.
Just hang on for the bumpy ride.
Keep our eyes on the skies, in the words of a great man. But you see, we don't know much. We know the signs of danger, and we know what we shouldn't do. We can't can't look around the corner. By the way, I'm 77, and I'm glad I never knew what was going to happen to me, because I would have said, no, let me off this boat. Go. It's good not to know the future to that extent and detail. The capstone does. Capstone knows an awful lot, be he male or female, leaving all that open.
Right.
And they see what Michael, you know, as a Catholic, that we believe, even though we don't act upon it very often.
Right.
We all believe we have an angel, a guardian angel.
Right.
Actually, by the way, we have two angels, but let me not complicate it now. We have one angel called the guardian angel, and in a normal way, if I am observing the law, if I'm keeping myself relatively clean of sin and trying to serve God in my own way, my angel communicates with me.
Okay.
And he does it in the accepted mode, and the accepted mode is by inspirations, by instincts, by twinges of conscience, by memories. Now, if that angel is not there, he has been renounced, and Lucifer is in his place. He does he uses the very same mode.
And that's how these plans are.
That's called possession.
Mm-hmm. So that's the dynamic of all of this.
That's right. And the remember that angelic possession is just as powerful as demonic possession.
Mm-hmm.
But many people do not attain to angelic possession because it takes a great amount of fidelity to your angel and to your instincts and to your life. But it is the source of great purity and great energy and great joy and great confidence in life. It doesn't mean you're not going to be spared suffering. No. Life is suffering anyway. But so similarly with the capstone people and those that work that way, their instincts have been honed by Lucifer.
So basically, they're executing a program.
That's right. Now, there are indications, but who gets near it? We have never gotten near it. There are indications that there are certain rites and ceremonies at which things are much more humanly visible and palpable, but we don't know anything about that. I do know that if you study the oaths, O-A-T-H-S, the oaths taken by people who ascend in the organization, my last reading of them was that you could take the first three oaths without much qualms as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But once you go beyond the third or fourth,
you're getting into dangerous water.
No, you renounce. You're renouncing Christ.
And then you are in dangerous water.
Implicitly. No, you're not in dangerous water. You're in the water, period. You're caught. And it's so simple. It's so simple. I must tell you a story which may shock you, but a young man whom I knew very well, he lived in New York for a while. And he was a young man, my God. He had the usual libido and and he was very honest, good, well, very educated, and a good American. But he got to know a girl, and they slept together. And at a certain moment, she said to him, "We must drink each other's blood. Just a little nick in the arm, and you drink my blood, and I'll drink your blood, and that will cement a pact with the Master between us." And at that moment, this boy who had been baptized, his angel must have spoken to him silently. He got out of the bed immediately and fled.
So he was presented with a choice, and he obviously had enough.
Well, he just had enough grace
to withstand that.
To get out.
Because I can see that in those types of moments, if a person has no faith, they could be taken.
Oh yeah, and they are taken. There's no doubt about that.
Interesting.
And then the snag is, once you're taken, and you have no idea of the tyranny, Michael, the painful, helpless tyranny that grips a man. A strong man will cry, describing their impotency to escape.
So it's a very powerful.
They can buy anything. They can have any woman they want. They can succeed in business.
I would imagine that gets old after a while.
You think it's what?
I said I can imagine that would get old after a while, and then they find out they can't get out.
Oh, but what I'm stressing is their helplessness and the tyranny they're subjected to. And mind control is not the way to put it. It's oppression. It's the most extraordinary, and it's the most extraordinary thing. And the pain they have, the helpless pain they have, they can do anything but escape it. And their minds, their conscious lives, their sleep, their waking, their love-making, their money-making, their everything is all darkened over by this horrible shadow. And they can't do anything about it. It's the helplessness, the pain. They cry.
Wow.
They weep, tears, and they can't do anything. They're caught. It's a terrible slavery.
Now,
terrible slavery.
Let me ask you this: in Windswept House, you make reference to, and it's proper, in its proper form, proper noun, whatever. You make reference to the process.
Yes.
Now, I'm curious because we've seen some very, very bizarre, horrific scandals in our 30-year history in this country. Charles Manson and the Son of Sam, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a reference to a group of people? Or is that just a reference to a machination or a dynamic?
Well, I think any person who is aware of what's going on, socially, culturally, and by culture I mean theater, television, Hollywood, TV, books, conventions, cultural events like Club Mediterranee and the whole tourist industry, and who's acquainted with how far we've gone in the cheapening of human life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that everybody has to admit that for even the last 30 years, since the 1960s, a process has taken place that, unknown to us, has coarsened our language, made us talk about things in public we'd never talk about.
Right.
It has created this almost destruction of marriage, because, one half of Americans are divorced, as far as I can make out, and has even successfully attacked the former monolith of the Catholic Church with abortion, contraception, sterilization. Do you know that 54% or 64% of normal Catholics who have 2 children or 3 maximum, they've both been sterilized? This is the figure I'm given. But there's even that monolith has been affected, and then the attendance to prayer and mass.
So it's erosion. It's just an erosion.
Well, but the process is fantastic. It's bit by bit by bit by bit,
piece by piece.
And this thing is not. This doesn't happen. Where were all the organizations and institutes that held so strong for hundreds of years? That they themselves have been corroded.
Wow. Yes.
So there's a process going on. It's not an abracadabra formula overnight and we're all ruined. No. It's taking generation after generation. For instance, in America, you can safely say that we started off after the war with a burgeoning Catholic school system. Now you can safely say that 2 generations of children have been reared in a non-Catholic moral atmosphere. And that by means of the process. Just the process.
I understand.
No violence, no violent attacks, no. Just the process.
Kind of brings to mind a maxim by Byron, the philosopher: "When Rome falls, the world."
Yeah. What's going to happen to Rome as the seat of the Catholic Church is something else. That's a whole broadcast by itself, a whole conversation by itself. Mm-hmm. But certain it is, it's not going to be what it was 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
There's a huge change going to take place. The catalyst for all that will be the departure of John Paul II, by resignation or by death, or both. And that's another topic completely.
Sure.
And to take a lot of practice. Do you remember that the greats of this world, dominate the 182 nations in the United Nations, and who are masters of the globalization, and this ongoing globalization is irresistible. It can't be stopped. Even if we all have a huge mess economically and financially, it still can't be stopped. All the more so will it be global. And Y2K, if you know what Y2K is, is the cleverest trick going. It's going to make us dependent on the government more than ever before. But nobody wants really the Catholic Church as an organization to disappear, but it wants it to fall into conformity with the mainstream. It wants
to have the appearance of the church, but not all of the
and to be a good socio-cultural stabilizer, and it is that.
How much of this, and I'm going to get into this a little more in depth after the break, but before we go to break, I want to ask you this one question. You were one of the individuals who was present in 1960 when John the 23rd read the third secret of Fatima.
Yes.
Now, how much of this, and just answer it briefly, and then we'll go to break, and when we come back we can get into a little bit more of it, but how much of what you read is germane to what's happening today?
Well, as they say in the universities, textually, what is happening was said in the letter. That's the frightening thing about it.
So everything would be the answer. Everything.
It's not a nice subject.
Okay.
It's a very frightening subject.
We'll come back to that in just a moment, okay? My guest is Father Malachi Martin. We're talking about his book, Windswept House, and what a discussion. This is really, really interesting. There's a lot more to come. We're going to get into the topic of mind control, and that is a big part of this as well, so stay tuned for that. I'm Michael Corbin. You're listening to the ParaNet Continuum. We'll be right back. Returning is Father Malachi Martin, author of Windswept House. By the way, Windswept House is now available in paperbacks in all major bookstores, and I highly encourage you to get a copy of that. And also, I think, just from my own perspective, I think that it would be wise, if you're interested in this subject, to get a copy of The Keys of This Blood, because I kind of look at those two as companion books.
Yeah, they are, really.
Yeah, and The Keys of This Blood is very interesting. It's fact, it's nonfiction, and of course it gives quite a primer on how and what forces are at work in this whole mix of things.
The funny thing, Michael, only now is that book coming into its own.
Really?
Yeah, only now is it sunk in.
Yeah.
When I proposed that book to my publisher originally, he said, "New order." He said, "That's off the wall." And so he's republishing the book. Anyway, okay.
Well, in this final segment, I want to get into the topic of mind control, because, again, all of these things that we see going on in the world, talk about conspiracy, and people used to take like you said, they used to laugh you out of the room when you talk about conspiracy. But I'm finding that people are more and more now beginning to see the writing on the wall, that something's really going on here.
Well, you see, Michael, we are far better educated now because we have the internet and we have TV and we have shows.
And authors like you.
Also books, and people now know, for instance, a thing being brought home to the normal American is that his or her vote, when he goes into the polling booth, his or her vote, its power has been so diminished and diluted because it goes through so many committees and commissions and party lines, and that by the time it arrives to the floor of the Senate or the the Congress, its power is so diluted by every sort of obstacle put in its way, special interests, vested interests, government interests, personal interests. That's number one. And number two, then, there's also this, that now we know things happen and we're never explained. For instance, we've been reading about this horrible story put up by CNN and Time magazine about the killing of the defectors.
Right.
But in all that's published, and I've read everything I could put a hands on, in everything that's published, nobody tells us who started the story.
That's something that's always missing.
It's missing. Nobody will tell us. Peter Arnett didn't start it. The editors of Time magazine didn't start it. Nobody in the Pentagon started it. Well, it must have started with one person someplace, but nobody's telling us. They know, but they're not telling us. Therefore, that means a control. That's a control, and you'd love to know how it started, but they won't tell you. That would blow the top of everything.
It's usually like a rumor mill, right?
Yeah, but who started the rumor? It must, in print.
Somebody's behind it.
Obviously. So we know there are things happening that we can't fathom, and we will never be told the answer.
Now we're fine. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Never be told the answer. That's the point I'm making, that we know there are things going on. That now we know life is not simple. The government is not merely there in order to defend our borders and to make sure the mail arrives on time.
Yeah.
That's not what government does nowadays. It's the most important element in our lives before our mother and father.
Wow. Now, we hear things coming out now in reliable places about this Nazi business, about mind control.
Yes.
Now, in a couple of previous programs I've talked with you about this, you have said that mind control is akin to diabolical possession, if not the real deal.
Well, there's this much is true, that the Nazis did develop a mind control system, which we didn't inherit, we took over from them.
Right.
And the effect of training our people, which we have done, in mind control, especially for the special forces and other such things, such government activities, paragovernmental activities, the effect has been, in very many cases, to produce the same phenomena as possession does.
And in what way? In other words, if it's not actually possession, what does it do? Is it something that...
No, it is possession.
It is possession?
Yep.
And the point of it is to eliminate the free will.
Yes, although that's the consequence. The fact is, Michael, that Hitler's people, and we following him, we discovered that there are powers in human beings, latent powers, that can be activated with training. And that's the first point. And the second point is that those powers, the latent powers that can be activated with a special, very specialized training, those powers are those we associate with a preternatural condition, like telekinesis, telepathy.
Remote viewing.
Yeah. There's a whole list of things, of powers, psychic powers, as we call them.
Mm-hmm.
They can be developed, and they affect the physical person.
Are they innate in human beings, or are they an agency of this possession?
No. They're innate powers, because you see, what we have is a torn nature.
But these forces or powers can use them against us.
Well, that's a big leap. The point I'm making is that our human nature is not in its natural condition. It did some terrible deprivation. We call it original sin in the Christian church.
Uh-huh.
But the power remain there, as it were, latently. They are now, you see, if you look at the question of the demon, if you believe demons exist, there are demonic angels. Angels have been demonized. They are not supernatural. They have nothing supernatural about them. Nor are they natural. They're on what we call the middle plateau.
They're stuck in between.
The middle plateau is the plateau on which they exercise these psychic gifts. And what you find about possessed people, genuinely possessed people, is they have extraordinary psychic gifts. Extraordinary. And they are evoked by their master, or their familiar, or whatever form the demon possessing them takes. Now, they have found that training these latent powers is very useful for certain types of special forces operations. But one side effect of the whole thing was to end up with phenomena that mimic possession so closely, it is possession. And the rationale, its only rationale, though, behind that is that anything you have must be for the glory of God, the glory of Christ, and serve the salvation of men.
And if it's not, it's serving Lucifer.
If it's not, you're serving Lucifer.
Very interesting.
So that's the difficulty. And the saddest thing I can ever find, and I've met so often in the last 30, 40 years, is people whom I know are being led out of all salvation, out of all grace, out of all human hope, by their psychic gifts being developed
Wow.
by a familiar.
Now,
Their father, because as you know, Satanism and Luciferianism is generally generational.
right.
It's your father and mother rear you to it.
That's how babies are possessed. When you were mentioned earlier.
No, they're not possessed. No, they can be obsessed for a while. Then they must
Make a
say
choice.
yes, and they must arrive at the point that they can say yes.
Yes.
And babies can't. But it's a complicated question. It's the mechanics are very, very difficult to describe in a short time.
In the remaining moments of the program,
Sure.
tell us, what can we do as people? What do we do to defend against this, or how do we prepare for this? What do we do?
Your own life, personal life, first of all. Be clean. Observe the law. Take your beliefs and refurbish them. Take your faith out of your pocket and polish it up, if it's a coin. And make sure you live according to your principles and not according to the passions that the corrupt world around us dictate. That's all you can do, really. Then, if you function as a doctor, as a lawyer, as a priest, as a clergyman, as a husband, whatever it is, enables you to help people to see the truth and to not live by lies and dishonesty, that you're supposed to do that. But there's not much else you can do except find the grace of God. If you haven't got the grace of God, go and ask God for it.
Yeah. Well, Father, thank you very much for being on the program tonight. It's very, very interesting 2 hours.
For having me.
And really appreciate it. Thank you very much. That was Father Malachi Martin, author of Windswept House. And again, that is now available in paperback. And again, I really encourage you to get a copy and read it, and also Keys of This Blood. Okay, that's it for us tonight. If you want to reach me, you can do so by calling 863-0484. My email address is mcorbin@dimensional.com. And, of course, our website is www.paranetinfo.com. Until next week, I'm Michael Corbin telling you to keep your eyes on the skies. Good night.